Welcome, 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 everybody, to another Sunday of When Black Women Gather. My name is Helen Higginbotham, and I am the founder of this organization. And we meet online every Sunday to talk about subjects that are relevant to us as a Black community, most times Black women, but of course, when it's um important to the entire community, we invite our brothers. So thank you, Black men, for showing up to join with us today. Um, we today are going to talk about immigration and what we need to know. There's so much talk going on around immigration. I thought this was a very timely conversation. And we are fortunate to have Rochelle Fortier Nwadibia with us. So hi, I'm going to just say, I'm just going to call you Rochelle. But anyway, hi, Rochelle. Thank you so much for coming.
Sure.
Rochelle.
Okay.
Okay. Now I can hear you. Okay. So Rochelle has over 40 years of experience doing this kind of work, and she's going to run us through a timeline of the formation of the United States and how immigration played into that. And then we'll go through a timeline to talk about the immigration laws and how they came into play. So let me say a little bit about her before we get started. She is an international human rights attorney and a consultant on international affairs and human rights. She represents refugees and immigrants and has litigated human rights cases concerning equal employment, equal pay, in the federal district court, and administrative and appellate proceedings. She has experience advising higher ed leadership on governance, which we all know, Howard folks, statutory compliance policy, faculty grievance systems, and other HR matters. She is a mediator and adjudicator for the state of Missouri Department of Education. Her education is, she's a graduate of Washington University School of Law, Columbia University School of International Affairs, and California State Hayward and Skyland College. Thank you so much for doing this for us, and we appreciate you coming in to talk to us today. So what we're going to do, please use the chats and give us any questions that you have, and we will circle back and get to them. And if it's just something pressing, we can talk about it in the meantime as we're talking, but preferably we'll hold off to the end. So on that note, I'm going to go off screen and turn it over to Rochelle. Thank you so much, Rochelle.
Okay, Helen. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with everyone today. Before I get started, I'm just going to add one more thing to my background that pertains to Black women. That I had a seminal case that was awarded by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that made female genital mutilation for Black women to be able to gain asylum in the United States. That case was my case. I'm hearing some other audio on here. Is there some other people in the room that aren't muted? Okay. Anyway, so I just wanted to raise that right now because that's female genital mutilation as a right to asylum. It's called Muhammad v. Gonzalez, if there's any other attorneys in the room. And that was my case. And so my work has been focused as an immigration attorney on primarily Black migration, although I serve all people. But that's the population and the demographic that doesn't really get that much attention in all the discussions around immigration. And so, in fact, right now, I'm working for a nonprofit which is called Haitian Bridge Alliance, and we serve migrants of African descent, as well as French migrants of African descent that are French speaking, especially. And so that's the work that I'm doing now, and I'm training lawyers now to be able to do this kind of work. Here. I'm based in California, as you can see. That's why I have the bridge in the background. I'm a San Franciscan and a third generation Californian. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen. If I could do it well, please bear with me, where I will put up this GIF that I want to share with you. Let's see. that gives us the framework for where we're going today. Are you able to see it?
Yes.
Is that working, Helen? Okay, great. All right, so this is the United States as we know it when we were the
You
first.
wanna, excuse me, Rochelle, go ahead and maximize your screen so we can't see your
Oh,
background.
okay, it's not showing it's doing that. All
It's
right.
showing, yeah, so just maximize.
Mhm. I'm not sure I know how to do that. I'll just stretch it out under the hopes that that does it.
Let me see, which one of these things up at the top?
The green one should maximize it. The
Which
green
one?
green dot,
Oh, the green dot
Right
to
there.
your
top
left,
left corner of the screen. You have the red one, and then like a gray one, and then there's a green one to your left top corner of that screen.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks for that. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that did it. Okay.
Okay. So then I can just shift it this way. Okay, great.
Yes.
Really great. So it makes it really large. So I just wanted you to get a sense of, I'm going to go over a timeline of how the laws evolved in immigration, but keeping in mind that it started with with the colonies, and I'm just going to silently sort of go through seeing how we gained the territory. Just keep in mind that up to the 18th, 19th century, we still were not west of the Mississippi, for example. So this part here just gets you to have a sense of what the country looked like as the immigration um, laws were enacted. So this is here we are in 1802, 1803, and here in 1803, we get west of the Mississippi because of Louisiana Purchase. And then it goes on. We got how things became more organized. Let me know if I'm going too fast. This was in a GIF and I slowed it down so people could see. For example, this is when Indiana was admitted as a state. Here's when Alabama territory and Mississippi came in, and that whole territory from France became Louisiana at the bottom and Missouri territory. This is when Illinois was admitted. That time we're showing Oregon County. This gray area down here on the left, that is really still Mexico. There's Arkansas territory, the border with Spain defined, because that's Mexico. (1821), Florida secedes from Spain. Missouri admitted in 1821. So you see how the country, because as the country comes together, then we get to the point where we need to keep people out. And so I just wanted you guys to get a sense of how this started and how we got to where we are today. So again, now this is just when the northern border was defined with Canada. You could see 1842. Now this territory down here with Texas, when Texas seceded from Mexico, disputed territory. 1846, Iowa admitted, Wisconsin admitted. Just seeing how the country comes together.
That's interesting. Just to see it, visualize it is interesting.
Right. Here's a Washington territory split off from the Oregon territory, Nebraska territory. See, you see there's other states that haven't been created yet. We're still in the 19th century here. This is pre-emancipation. Right here, this frame is interesting because this is 1860 when South Carolina seceded. So this is the beginning of the Confederacy. And it grows. And it grows. And it grows. Well, this is during the Civil War. These are the territories and the states that seceded. In the meantime, we're still adding territory. Colorado's territory is organized. Texas secedes. So we're still in the Civil War, Confederacy. Virginia secedes. Arkansas secedes. Arkansas is formally admitted to the Confederate States. North Carolina secedes. Someone's not muted, Helen.
I said exactly that last night, which was that the Supreme Court decision.
Everybody, make sure you're muted, please.
Okay.
I think you as host can mute everybody, Helen.
I can, but
Okay, so this is pretty much the United States as we know it. Here in 1860, I can't see the year, but this is when we purchased Alaska from the Soviet Union. This is still just post Civil War. And then they went through a process of readmitting all these states. I'm not trying to give you a geographic history, but just so that you can see that the territory was not always coast to coast.
No, but me not go there. No, me not go there. My trip is not to go to Moors. No, me not go there.
somebody needs to mute. Let me see if I can mute everybody. Please mute
Phone
whoever
number
that is.
561.
Somebody on the
Yeah,
on the
your phone
phone.
number 561.
Oh, it's on the phone. 561, I need you to mute your phone, please. All right, go ahead.
Okay. Then they went through a process of readmitting all these states and these, to create the country where we are now. That's it. Here, Hawaii came in 18, I think it was 98. And then the Philippines, let's see, Puerto Rico came in the 1890s, and they came in as US citizens. Okay, I think I'm gonna stop here because it pretty much tells us where the country is now. So I'll stop
Okay.
sharing my screen.
All right. I did it for you.
Thank you so much. Okay. So now if you could, now I'm gonna start with the
PowerPoint.
timeline of US laws that affect immigration. So if you could share the screen, please.
Okay. Oops. Where is it? Oh, man. All right, y'all. I have it open somewhere. I don't see it here, though. Hold on. I have it open, so where is it? Why can't I find it? Bear with me, folks. I gotta go back into my email, I guess, and find it again. But it's open, so I'm not sure. Someday I'm gonna be good at this. We just did it online, the two of us together, so why it's not popping up for me is beyond me. Okay, there it is. All right, so let me see something. I don't
And we
understand.
posted
Oh,
an
there it is.
article,
I see it. I see
which is
it.
going to be later reference on how the U.S. system, immigration system works. And we'll start talking about that at the end of the presentation, but it'll be something. What I'm doing today is to give you the framework for being able to understand how the process works with all the background that comes before it. Okay, so we can, laws and institutions governing immigration and naturalization in the United States. I'm going to start with the timeline so you can see how the law evolved. And then at the end, I'll let you see the agencies, the government agencies that are involved in administering the whole immigration process. It's the Department of State, Department of Justice, and now the Department of Homeland Security. Okay,
Okay, hold on.
yeah,
I'm
we need
not,
to go back one, I think,
yes.
back to,
Okay.
back. Okay, yeah, the next one to 1, 2.
Okay.
All right, there we go. Okay, so if you can follow along with me, you could see that the first immigration law came in 1790. So when you remember, before that, there were no immigration rules. And based on that a map that I showed you, you know that during that time period, it was really pretty much the 13 colonies. I need you to go back.
You know what, when I mute myself, I lose my thing at the bottom. So that's what's happening here. So I'm
Okay,
just gonna have to
okay,
stay unmuted. So if you hear noise, it's gonna be my noise. Go ahead.
all right. So in 1790 and in 1795, there were laws passed that limited citizenships to white males with property. So those are the only people that had citizenship. And this was what the first immigration law that we had. 1798, there is the first law that allows for the removal of aliens being non-citizens. And that was in 1798, but it was for people that were considered dangerous to the peace and safety of the United States. In 1803, this is after Haiti became independent. After they defeated Napoleon, there was a ban on any Negro, mulatto, or other person of color migrating into the United States. So that was the first ban of Black people in 1803. In 1808, the importation of enslaved persons was prohibited. And then in 1830, the Indian Removal Act required moving, and many of you have probably studied this in history, the removal of all Native Americans to west of the Mississippi River. So remember that map that I showed you, west of the Mississippi River was outside of the territory of the United States at that time. It's no longer the case because we're coast to coast. But at that time, that was when that Trail of Tears, we know it as, where they were marched over to what's now more Oklahoma territory. In 1848, I pointed out the dispute with Mexico earlier when Texas seceded. When that whole dispute was resolved, we got the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And when that treaty was negotiated, the 80,000 Mexican residents that were already living in the territory, because keep in mind, it wasn't really American territory, those Mexican residents were granted citizenship en masse, 80,000 people. So that's the first time we see this where we get an affirmative grant of citizenship for a large group of people. In 1854, the Supreme Court of California determined that the Chinese people were added to the group of people, which were Native American and Black, and stated that they were not capable of testifying against white people. That had only been applied to Blacks and Native Americans, but by the California Supreme Court in 1854, which was not too long after we became a state, by the way, the Supreme Court ruled that a Chinese person cannot testify against a white person. You'll find as I'm going through this, you'll see the patterns. Black people are in as much of the same struggles that we have today, where there's control over people of color, Black people, also women. And so here we see in, let's see, that the legal status of white women is determined by the status of her husband. So that didn't affect as much black women, but it shows that the control, because in the beginning I showed you far left there, white property men had citizenship. So white women, their citizenship was dependent upon whom they were married to. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, 1857, we're up to 1857 now. Many of you are familiar with the Dred Scott case, who was an enslaved individual. And by the way, I always use enslaved. I do not call Black people as a noun as being a slave. Black people were humans. We were people. We remained people. We were enslaved. And so this was an enslaved person that was suing for his freedom, and the Supreme Court denied it. And I don't know if you can see here, it said denied the citizenship to people of African descent, making them ineligible for rights and privileges of American citizens. And it also stated that the enslaved people had no rights of protection from the federal government or the courts. And so this is just before the Civil War, 1857. 1862, when we're in the Civil War and people are fleeing, enslaved people are fleeing to go and fight for the Union, there's a dearth of workers. And so the southern states were trying to bring in people from China. It was called the coolie trade. And so to replace these workers, so to prevent them from bringing in people from China in 1862, they had this law that prevented them from coming in as laborers for that. 1863, we get Emancipation Proclamation. That is by executive order. And I point out the source of the law because at the title of this, I say summary of US laws in the 19th century, but the law is made, for those of you who are not lawyers, the law is made through acts of Congress, court interpretation of law, and executive order. So the Emancipation Proclamation that was issued by Abraham Lincoln was an executive order. And so it freed all people from enslavement. This is in 1863. Let's see, what's the next step? In 1864, they tried to bring back, in a way, indentured servitude so that they can encourage immigration again. And so keep in mind, at that time, there was no immigration coming from any continent where there were non-white people. It was still immigration that was coming primarily from Europe. And you can see in 1868, there was a treaty, the Burlingame Treaty is called. It allowed Chinese labor to come in, and they were guaranteed free migration. Then in 1868, we got the seminal decision. Well, it's not a decision. We amended the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship to all formerly enslaved persons of African descent. That's the 14th Amendment. It's a constitutional amendment, so it's in a part of the Constitution. At this point, I'm going to stop for a minute and just say that when people, oh, no, please go back.
I'm trying.
That's okay. That's all right.
Where are we at? Don't know what's going on.
Back a little bit. But when France donated the Statue of Liberty to the United States, it was to honor the emancipation of the enslaved people of the United States. It is not a beacon for migration. It was to honor the freedom of enslaved African people in the United States, the Statue of Liberty. And that was why that gift was given. You want to check that. There was a Washington Post article on that a while back. I don't have it handy, but just so everybody is clear, the Statue of Liberty was given to the United States to honor Black people.
Next, Rochelle.
Not yet. 1870, there was a no, back up, please. I'm still on that line. We're at 1870 now. 14th Amendment was in 1868. And later you will see, as I continue talking, that it was expanded because there's several different types of citizenship, by blood, by birth, and by derivation from your family. And so by giving this 14th Amendment, it allowed, that was the type of naturalization, it's not a naturalization, but the type of citizenship process that is that if you're born in the United States, you are a citizen. This comes from this 14th Amendment. That rule, it started for the enslaved, free enslaved people, and then it got broadened later to include other nationalities, and then finally all nationalities, regardless of race, benefit from this 14th Amendment. Okay, so now it's just for Black people. In 1870, the Naturalization Act limited citizenship to white persons and persons of African descent and barred all Asians. So this is, the Asian theme continues for several years here. You see, this Page Act in 1875 was targeted at the Chinese because many of the men were here. There were no women. They couldn't be involved with white women, but this law banned them from bringing in women for immoral purposes because it was assumed that if Chinese women were coming in, it had to be for some immoral reason. So that was the Page Act. We'll go to the next screen. And this is building up. This time, this anti-Chinese sentiment is continuing. They required residency permits for Asians. The Supreme Court in 1875 was also determined to be the only arbiter of issues governing immigration. So, like many of you have heard in the news recently where Texas has put all those barriers out in that river to keep people from crossing over. Well, Texas does not have the authority because that's an immigration issue, right? And so this in 1875, the Supreme Court affirmed that immigration is the sole authority for the US federal government. But you could see now, I mean, most people have complied with that, but occasionally something pops up again where an individual state is trying to regulate immigration. They do not have the authority to do that. This treaty in 1880 allowed for some Chinese workers, and here for me, the significance of this is that they allowed certain categories of Chinese workers. You can see, you've got a racial system that's on caste, it's only white people. Now you start seeing different types of workers or people of certain ethnic descent that are allowed in. So in 1880, they allowed in certain categories of Chinese workers. And in 1882, here we have this act that's just the Chinese Exclusion Act that just places broad restrictions on and bars the entry of Chinese immigrants. And again, there's more laws in 1885, still navigating this, how we're going to let people come in from other countries when they give an exception only for domestic services and skilled workmen. In 1891, the first Office of Immigration is created. And the criteria, they had certain criteria that they developed for, that was non-racial, that kept people from being able to come into the United States. Next slide, please. Okay, this person, Thomas Gary, he sponsored a law to that reinforced the Chinese Exclusion Act, ban on Chinese immigration, and required the Chinese people to carry papers. Papers, please. That was what happened to enslaved people back in the day. If you were found outside of a plantation or something, papers, please. And that is certainly unconstitutional in our modern day, where people should have the liberty and the freedom to travel anywhere in the United States without having to show papers. But the Chinese people were required to keep these certificates of residence or certain documents to show that they entered the country lawfully. Then in 1894, there was this Immigration Restriction League that was founded in three people from Harvard, where there had been a lot of migration from Southern and Eastern Europe. And so everyone was all in alarms from all these people coming from Europe. And so they formed this league to try to put a stop to it. In 1896, you know, if you think about this, you know, you could see the sentiment of the country. So we've been here before with this anti-immigrant perspective that has been in the country since, you know, and the limitation on people has been going on for a while. The Supreme Court in 1896 provided for the the authority of immigration people to detain people. And here, 1898, I mentioned about the 14th Amendment. This case, Wong Kim, he sued to be able to have citizenship because he was born here. And first, in this case, the 14th Amendment was extended to citizenship for people born on US soil. So you're born here, you're a citizen here. Next slide. Uh, 1901, they were trying to exclude the anarchists. 1904, they're still after the Chinese. They amended the act and were limiting Chinese people from coming. And then Chinese community had built up here. They organized vendors organized an anti-American boycott for this reason. Again, in 1907, women that had married non-Americans, their citizenship was revoked from them, taken away. 1913, California alien land law prevented Chinese and Japanese from owning any property in the state. This is 1913. And I'm a Californian. I can vouch for the fact that Black people did own property here at that time. My family was living here and they owned property in the late 19th century. So you could see that this was targeted at Asians. 1970, another law banning, they had a barred zone in Asia that defined who could come in. And so all Asians were banned except for people in Japan and the Philippines. When we acquired Puerto Rico in 1917 as a territory, they came in with US citizenship. But it's still kind of a limited citizenship because they don't vote for the president. They don't have an electoral college. So only people that are in the Puerto Ricans that are territorial in the mainland that are able to vote, but they do have the right to vote. It's just that it's only in the United States, if they're physically present in the United States. Now we're getting 1921, we're getting into the era where this is after World War II, after the pandemic that came after World War II. People are feeling like they want to address immigration again. And they started with this Quota Act, and they limited European immigration to 3% of the total population based on the census of 1910. Keep in mind, it was only for Europeans. At that time, Haiti was a country, but there was no allocation for that, or Ethiopia for that matter. Next slide, please. Still, again, the targeting of Asians, 1922. This Ozawa, I think they must have been Japanese, but they sued for the ability to naturalize. And naturalize, of course, is when you allow people to become citizens after they're already here. But at this time, the citizenship was banned to people that were not white or not Black, right? So they wanted to become citizens, but the Supreme Court ruled they were not eligible because they were not white. And then in 1923, another Supreme Court case for this person that was from India, who was racially white and looked white, but the Supreme Court ruled that they were not white. And so therefore they were not entitled to naturalize, to become a citizen. Then in 1924, we have this Johnson-Reed Act. And that act continued all the way up to the 60s, which they created this formula, national origin formula, where they looked at the census again in 1890, and for people that were living here, they would allow 2% of their nation's people to come in. And so African, Latin American continents were not included. And Asian immigrants still at this time are excluded. But this became the foundation of our immigration system. And later I'm going to talk about how, therefore, that was the basis for, bringing in all these millions of people from Ellis Island. So the migration and the acceptance of people into the country has been based on who is white once you get here, whether or not you can become a citizen, is determined by this. 1924, this is ironic. All of a sudden, we're allowing Native Americans to become citizens.
Hypocrisy of
Exclude my
that.
commentary, but so 1924, Indians are allowed, Native Americans really are allowed to become citizens. Although, as you can see here, some people still restricted their access to voting. 1929, Mexicans were expelled and repatriated to Mexico. And then there was another law, the Undesirable Aliens Act, Blessey's Law, that criminalized the crossing of the border outside of an official port of entry. So this is targeted towards our contiguous neighbors coming up from in the Western Hemisphere, coming up from Latin America and elsewhere, but also technically it should also apply for the northern border, but that's not really enforced there. 1934, the Tidy-McDuffie Act to strip Filipinos of their status. They were U.S. nationals. There is another category of people that can be in the country. They're nationals. People from Samoa have it, and they're able to come into the country, but they're not really citizens, so some things are limited. But that was stripped to the Filipino people, and then they granted, you could change the slide, they granted independence to the country of the Philippines, so they didn't have to deal with a lot of migration there. Alien Registration Act requires fingerprinting of all aliens over the age of 14. That got implemented, and that's very common now in the immigration system. You always, whenever you're asking for a benefit, you have to go get what used to be fingerprints, but what's now called biometrics. And so that's the way people are traced, is through that method now, but also to check criminal background and all those things when people are asking for benefits. That's how that's processed, and that's how that's checked through the biometrics. That's still in place today. So the Expatriation Act that governed women was partially repealed in 1922, but still, if they marry a nation, they lose their citizenship. 1942 through 1964, we had a Bracero program that allowed for temporary workers to come in from Mexico. And this was for a variety of things, but primarily a lot of them came in to work in farmland. A variation of these kinds of programs still exists today. I'll mention later, it's the H-2 worker program, because we need these workers to come in and work the fields. Executive Order 1942 required the confinement and internment of the Japanese people, many of them citizens. 1943, the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act, but there were still other laws that kept them from coming in, but that official act was repealed. 1944, very interesting, the Supreme Court upheld the right to inter the Japanese, and then it flipped over and it stopped it because it said that the military necessity is not grounds for it. So that just lasted over a two-year period that was legal to do. 1945, very interesting. There was a law passed to support war brides. Hey, Vivian. The War Brides Act, which allowed the wives of citizens who served in the United States or the U.S. Armed Forces to enter. So you notice The men still have the privilege to bring in or be married to women that are US citizens. Or my mother had a first cousin. He served in the Philippines. He married a Filipino woman. He brought her back, and that's under the privilege of this War Brides Act. Next slide. The Lewis-Celler Act, 1946, allowed Filipino and Indian immigrants to become naturalized citizens. 1946, we allow Indian immigrants, meaning South Asia and East Asia Filipinos, to be able to naturalize as US citizens. And then, this is post-World War II. So then also, there's becoming to be some accommodation of people that are coming. And the Fulbright-Hays Act, many of you have heard of people being on Fulbright scholarships. This was to promote mutual understanding between the United States and the rest of the world. This is a program that's still ongoing, where we have this sort of exchange. It's on an individual basis. People get scholarships to come and work here, get exposure to American culture. Others from here go abroad. So that's something to create more friendly relations with people, since we have been in the era of constantly excluding people all this time. Then now, after World War II, we've got a lot of people that are displaced due to the war, and many people are still refugees. And so the international community had to figure out what to deal with this. And so this is when we begin to see the development of refugee policy, which acknowledges peoples that are displaced, that can't return to their homelands, where they originated from. A prime example of this would have been the Jewish people who were in Germany, and many of them were trying to find other places where they could live. The United States, hadn't been very open to that during the era pre-war. So many of these refugees included, I think, many Jewish people, among others, that were displaced due to the war. We didn't initially sign on to this, although we did get involved after the protocol, but the environment in the country at the time was still not sufficient for us to sign on to the protocol, the initial protocol for displaced persons. 1950, we're still worried about communists. Then we barred admissions to communists. Those kinds of rules are still in place when people apply for benefits. There are questions on the forms asking them, have you done this? Have you participated in communist activity? Different, or terrorist activity, it's more now. So those kinds of restrictions still exist today. 1951, the UN Convention. Remember that the UN didn't exist before World War II. So the UN Convention, this is some of the first work of the United Nations to come in and start dealing with these refugees. But keep in mind that it was primarily European refugees in 1951. And then 1952, the Asian Exclusion Act is finally repealed, and there's the beginning of a system of preferences based on skills and family. So as I pointed out to you before, skills, we saw that started to come up with the Chinese. So there's who do we want coming in the country? Well, either you're coming in because you have family ties, or you have some sort of skill sets. So, but keep in mind with the family ties, that means you have people that are already in the United States that are petitioning for you, right? And so that limits, the people of African descent, because we don't have ties. Those family ties were severed during enslavement in the Middle Passage. So that's not a policy that we as African Americans would have been able to take advantage of, except for those few people that may have been here in the 50s, and there's very, very few at the time. And I would imagine they were more people from the Western Hemisphere and not from Africa itself. Because keep in mind that most of Africa was under colonial rule at that time. Next slide. Again, a special permission for workers, H-2 guest worker visa program in 1952 authorized the non-immigrant category for farm workers to come in on a temporary basis. 1953, the Refugee Relief Act extended refugee status to non-Europeans. So we had to have a rule for that to allow them to come in and not just people from Europe. Okay. 1953 to 54 was Operation Wetback. They were rounding up Mexican nationals, sending them back to Mexico. Many US citizens caught up in that. Special law for Hungarians, Cubans, and Chinese parole to help refugees fleeing communism. But there was still a lot of fervor, anti-immigrant fervor at that time. So there was a huge publicity campaign that was developed to try to get people to agree to allow these migrants to come in. Again, 1962, skilled specialists and relatives are US citizens, 62 and 65. This is where we created the immigration system that we have today, where we have family unity, and then we have the business side where we allow people in. So this era, 1962 and 1965, has had a priority on family reunification. But once again, that's a category that primarily had excluded African Americans until modern times now, where we have more people that have migrated from Africa and then do have family members that they're bringing in under this system. Next slide. Again, a special priority for the Cubans. Once again, this is during the era of the Cuban Missile Crisis, for those of you who are old enough to remember. So a lot of focus on being able to allow those people that are more friendly towards the United States to be able to escape Cuba and come into the country. Again, 1967, this status of refugees removed the European limitation and then allowed for more sponsorship from Asia and Latin America. 1975, many of you remember, this is after the Vietnam War, a lot of boat people, orphans, the Indo-Chinese Migration and Refugee Assistance Act allowed 135,000 Vietnamese and other Southeast Asians into the country. I have a personal story around that. When they brought the children here, they brought them to San Francisco. They were at the Presidio and they housed them in the families' homes. My mother was a foster mother, so she had a Vietnamese kid that was biracial, Vietnamese and African American, that she took care of until a family adopted him. It was an African American family, actually a nurse, African American nurse who spoke the language and had lived over there during the war. She adopted him. I'm sure there were many others. And then we're getting more into the modern era. That was the Pope people. And then we move on to the Immigration Control and Reform Act, which put more the IRCA, it was called. We start to get these acronyms for these laws. IRCA required employers to document their workers, but then also that was really the major amnesty for immigration that we've ever had, that brought in 3 million undocumented residents. That was 1986. 1990, they increased. There's all kinds of limits on how many people can come in, how many visas are available. And in 1990, the number of immigrants were increased, but then also that was the time that the H-1B program was created. Now, I want to point out right now that there's a distinction between immigrant and non-immigrant visas. So people can get visas to come in and be present in the United States and do whatever they've requested to do. H-1B is in that category. If there is no path to citizenship under the H-1B program. But the people that come in on that program, they're only allowed to work for the employer that sponsored them. They cannot go out and find a job someplace else. They'd have to go back and then come back in. And so they're really tethered to their job. And I see this more as it's like an indentured servitude, but this program has definitely benefited the tech industry, the H-1B program. And that's what's in the news. That's what Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are talking about now, that they need the H-1B program for so-called all sorts of reasons. But it's a very limited program. They don't vote. You have to have citizenship to vote. They just come in and they fill the jobs. They have the right to be here. Next slide. 1991, the ABC settlement, a lot of religious organizations doing the 80s, and people were fleeing from El Salvador and Guatemala because of all of the, this is under Jimmy Carter, where people were disappearing in great numbers and there was a lot of violence. Well, when people got to the United States and they filed for asylum so they don't have to go back to these countries, they were routinely denied, even though they met the definition of being an asylum seeker. They were denied. And so under this settlement, the churches, this was the beginning of the sanctuary movement. People were being sheltered in a lot of churches, and the churches coalesced and sued because they were granting the asylum to people. And this settlement, the ABC settlement, allowed these people to be able to therefore get documented legally in the United States. And the procedures were changed and the routine denials were stopped. 1992, Tiananmen Square in China, the Chinese students who were in the United States at that time when this act, Chinese Student Protection Act, was passed to give green cards to those students that were here. I'm not sure why that happened. Was just because we wanted to show that we were anti-communist, because basically all they had to do was do what everybody else did, which is apply for asylum. And then within a year after, if you're granted asylum, then 1 year after that, you're able to apply for a green card. Here, this Chinese Protection Act looks like they're going straight to green card. Modern era, 1990s, this is under Bill Clinton. These others were under Reagan and then Bush 1. Now 1996, we're under, this is called IRA, Immigration Reform and Control Act. This empowered more of the government authorities to enforce these restrictions. Again, the NACARA was for a special for Nicaraguan, Salvadorian, Guatemalan, allowing them to apply for asylum. The Flora settlement was just children that come in as undocumented without parents. They have special treatment and they actually have access to green cards for coming in on their own, but they were being housed in these horrible conditions. And so this settlement, they were sued in this settlement, granted better treatment of these minors that were coming into the country. In 1998, certain Haitian immigrants that were present in the country were given access to green cards. Next slide. In 2001, the Supreme Court decided that even though they had the authority to detain migrants, they couldn't detain them indefinitely. And that was the case law. There's still a lot of issues around that, trying to get people out of detention. You know, they're being housed, clothed, fed, everything on taxpayer dimes. Many of them are not threats to society. Again, it's been more around constriction. Again, 2002, this was 9/11, right? This is after 9/11. We have the Enhanced Border Security and Visa Entry Reform Act, and the Homeland Security Department was created because it used to just be the Immigration and Naturalization Service. But now the Department of Homeland Security, I'll show you an organization chart of that later. That was when they brought immigration and all different agencies that affect the security of the homeland under the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11. More restrictions, 2006, there's the Secure Fence Act to enhance border security. In 2012, when Obama was in power, he by executive order authorized special status for deferred action for childhood arrivals. These basically was to address the problem of the dreamers who had come here as children, whose parents had brought them here, no other country. This has been litigated a lot in the courts, if you recall, and right now, only the people that already have it continue to use it. It's been banned for everybody else that qualifies. He also tried to do it in 2014 for the parents, and that was stopped by the Republicans in the court. That's no longer effective. And then the last thing that I want to bring up is the Muslim travel ban, which was something that the Supreme Court upheld, and it's just another stain, on our immigration history. And I think that's it, right? We're done here, right? You want to go to the next slide? Okay, so that's the timeline. But I wanted to point out the agencies that actually work for where immigration takes place. So the Department of State is one of them. If you have somebody that you're petitioning for, you do start with the Homeland Security, but the role of the Department of State is to process those people that family members petition for outside the country to come in. You want to hit next slide, please? Okay, so this you can see over here on the right, the Department of Consular Affairs under this Undersecretary for Management. That's where all of the admissions come in for people that are coming into the country. It's through Consular Affairs. Consulates are usually attached to embassies. All embassies have a consulary section, but if the countries are large enough, you will find consulates throughout the country. In some countries, and a consulate is limited to this type of process. Next slide. This is the Department of Homeland Security I mentioned earlier. Go to the next slide. I think we have a better one on the organizational chart. There we go. And so these are the different aspects of U.S. Customs, the U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Citizenship and Naturalization Enforcement, Customs and Border Protection, CBP, all of these, FEMA, they're all under the Department of Homeland Security now. Next slide. And the Department of Justice. Next slide. The Department of Justice houses the Immigration Court. This EOIR stands for Executive Office of Immigration Review. And so the Office of the Immigration Judge is where the cases begin. Immigration courts, but over here on the bottom right, if people don't prevail there, they will appeal to the box up on the full left side of the next row, the row that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the left side there, Board of Immigration Appeals. If they lose their case there, next slide, then they're able to appeal their case to the Court of Appeals. And that depends upon where the case originated. So for example, out here where it says 9, California, if the case got to the Immigration Court in the Ninth Circuit, that's where it goes back. That's the circuit that will handle the appeal from the Board of Immigration Appeals. So you can look and see, you may know what your circuits are, but if you live in Florida, it's the 11th Circuit. That's where a lot of litigation's been going on with respect to those documents that Trump took, because he took them to Florida. And so the litigation below was in Florida, and the appellate court is in Florida. So depending upon where you live, the Ninth Circuit is pretty much the largest. It has been traditional, and the Fifth Circuit is the most conservative. In fact, many of their times, their decisions are not even rational, and the Supreme Court has to correct them. But this is why people that want to fight anything on immigration, they find a court in the Fifth Circuit, because they know that's where the most conservative judges are. The Ninth Circuit, we have a plethora of judges, but it has a reputation for being the most liberal, and many of the Republican presidents have tried to cut it up, break it up, whatever, to diminish the influence that the Ninth Circuit has. And so these courts of appeals are not just to hear immigration appeals. These are the courts of appeals. These are the last courts before you go to the Supreme Court. Okay, next slide.
That's the last slide. That's the last slide. Mm-hmm.
So that's that sort of concludes my presentation for now. I'm opening, I think though, can you post again that article, if you don't mind?
Sure.
That I
Yeah,
want.
let me scan the I wasn't able to look at the chats. So let's see if
Oh,
there's
all
anything
right.
in the chats that we want to hit before we go on. Thank you. That was so informative for me, and I'm sure everybody else thought the same. Um, are you seeing anything? I'm doing two things at once. You seeing anything in the
I
chats
don't
that
see
we
any
need to
questions yet.
address?
If you do have questions, please post them in the chat now.
Okay. So somebody says, can their children of H-1B holders become citizens if born here?
If they're born here, they're citizens, yes.
Okay.
That's what the Republicans like to call anchor baby. It's a really a derogatory term. Well, but at the same time, we could say that, some prominent children are so-called anchor babies, but I don't like the term to use, but that's what the 14th Amendment granted, was that
But you
anybody
know,
on the territory. The only exceptions there are if you entered the country on a diplomatic passport, then you came in under the country under the protection of your government, and you're not eligible to, their children are not considered US citizens if they're born here.
so let's say that the holder of the H-1B visa has a child here, but now their assignment is up with their employer because they're only here, as I recall, they're here at the pleasure of being sponsored by an employer. So now this assignment is up. Can they stay? What happens with them? Because their child can stay, obviously.
The child can
Correct?
stay, they have to leave. And most people would elect to take their child with them, and then the child has the right to come back at any time.
Got you.
Mhm, mhm.
Okay. And you talk about derogatory terms, alien and wetback. It's just amazing, kind of,
Yeah,
sort of, that this language was ever formalized in law. It's just, I mean, does any other country call immigrants alien, or is that something exclusive to the United States?
and I can't
And I
answer
know
that.
we don't do it anymore, but was it ever done
I
by
don't,
anybody else, or is that
I
a
don't,
United States thing?
I don't know what the language is. The only thing that I really like to say is that no one's illegal. People are not
Hmm.
illegal. The borders moved.
Hmm.
That whole Mexico, where, I pointed out on that GIF, that was Mexican territory. So some people didn't move, the border moved, and so now all of a sudden they're undocumented. And I
Hmm.
mentioned earlier, 80,000 people, they got citizenship rights at that time. But,
Hmm.
many people, the borders have moved. And I've seen other examples of it up in the Canadian border, where some people in some Indian tribes, part of their tribe line is in Canada, the other part of it is in the United States. And so it was the border that moved, it was not the people.
Okay. We have a hand up, but before we go to that, let me do this next question in the chats. Can you talk about birthright citizenship? I guess, what does that mean? What does it look like? What are the
It's,
privileges
we
that are
all
extended?
we all have birthright citizenship. It's me and you.
So if anybody born here,
Anyone born here?
talk to
That's
me, of
us.
course.
That's
Mhm.
us. Right. Mhm.
So when we on the different types of visa, so when you mentioned the green card, what privileges or restrictions come with the green card?
Okay. So that's an immigrant visa. Remember earlier I mentioned the fact that there's an immigrant visa and there's non-immigrant visas. Non-immigrant visas, people are like on H-1B, there's no path to citizenship. There is a way that the employers can sponsor them to get them on a green card path, but very few employers do it because it's a disincentive, they're not incentivized to give their employees the right to go work someplace else. It's not a path, but there is not another opportunity that they could select, but they have to be sponsored by, in order to become an immigrant, you have to be sponsored by someone. Someone has to petition for you in order for you to be in the United States if you're abroad, or if this is for an immigrant visa. The immigrant visa is the path to citizenship. It starts with the green card, lawful permanent residence. It actually used to be a green card. It's not green anymore, but that's where it got the name of being the green card. But so people get what's called lawful permanent residence, exactly what it means. You're legal, you are permanent, and after 5 years, you can apply for citizenship when you have lawful permanent residence. Some people, like I know people that are from some of the Samoas, if they get citizenship in another country, they lose their land rights in their home country, and so they don't take it on. They want to just be green card holders. And some people just don't bother. Maybe they don't speak enough English to pass the citizenship test. So people sometimes are satisfied with being lawful permanent residents. They have the right to petition for certain family members, but if they petition for a child, the child cannot be married. If the child marries after they petition, the petition is no longer valid, and then they have to do a different type of petition for them. The fastest process is based on U.S. citizenship petition, not lawful permanent resident petition, although they have the right to do that as well. It's just that there's different categories. The article that I've given you, the link that you're going to put up there, defines how those categories works and the visa system for bringing people over.
I just posted the article again. So
May I just share something, Miss Higgy? Miss Phyllis?
go ahead, Phyllis.
Yes, I was just wanting to share. I came to the United States on a student visa in 1963.
Mhm.
And I've been through everything that you have just shared, from being a resident alien, one with a green card. And for some unknown reason, while I married, most folk have a tendency to think that because you marry an American, you automatically can become, but you have to apply for it. I have maintained a permanent residency for over 60 some years. I'm a British citizen, and for some unknown reason, I just never fully applied. I took the test and so forth to become a citizen. Long story short, I remain with the British citizen, and my younger daughter is concerned that they're going to grab me up and send me away because I no longer have that uh, just take you away. But I don't think that's going to take place. But I've been through the whole gamut that they've had. Green
Glad
card.
you asked that. That was my question I was going to ask about the green card. Do the people with
The
green cards
green
need to be
card,
concerned?
I had to apply every January the 1st. I just went to the post office and made application and sent it in to, I guess, the immigration office, wherever. And that went on for years with the green card. Then all of a sudden I had to become a permanent resident. Now that's costly now. It used to be $300. The last residency was approaching $1,000 by the time I got the picture taken and so forth. And they gave me a choice of becoming a citizen or continue with the permanent residency. Uh, it expires this year, so I'm in some.
Well, if your green card expires, that does not mean that your residency has expired. That
I
just
don't
means
have a green card anymore. I just have a permanent resident card.
that is the
But
green
I have
card.
to get it every 10 years.
That is the green card. That is the
Oh, okay,
Go
but
ahead.
it used to be really green, honestly.
That's right. It used to
It
be
used to be really green.
right.
So all those different decades that you went through, I can basically identify with them. And that's where I stand. I have a permanent residency card for the end of 2025.
But what I'm saying to you is that your status is still there. You
Yes,
just have to renew the card.
yes.
It, that-
If I'm-
it
yeah.
doesn't go away. They
Oh,
still,
no.
you still have the lawful permanent resident status. They use that to have people come in, give biometrics to see whether or not you haven't committed any crimes or anything like that, and
Correct.
then they issue you a new card.
The only thing denied was the right to vote, but I've had some excellent job positions offered. Never had any type of situation there regarding discrimination that I felt. But there we go. I was just wanting to share that aspect.
Yeah, that was my question. I was wondering that too, with all the hoopla and the threats of deportation. Do people with that I mean, in your professional opinion, people of that status, should they be concerned or just
Well,
live life
what they
as
would
they
have to be concerned, first of all, if you're a lawful permanent resident, you are a lawful permanent resident. And that does not change, and it has not changed unless Congress repeals that. That isn't, I don't see that happening. Okay, there's too many people. The economy, even to deport these undocumented people, the economy would take a huge hit. But for people that are lawful permanent residents, I don't see, the only thing that you see is the abuse that sometimes people are profiled and then they get swept up in these problems. But I have had situations where people who didn't even have documentation of their US citizenship, but were in fact US citizens through derivation. I had a gentleman from Belize, and his mother had come in a time that he was still in Belize, but he came here, committed crimes. They were getting ready to deport him back to Belize until I stepped up and said, wait a minute, he's a US citizen. But I had to take the time to document that as a matter of law, he was a derivative of a US citizen and he was a US citizen, and they couldn't deport him. Now, what's going to happen under Trump? We just have to wait and see. A lot of it, I think it's just a lot of bluster. It was a way to get votes. The way to get votes. The reality is setting in now. Who's stepping up? His own people. Vivek Ramaswamy and Musk saying, hey, we need these workers. We need H-1B. So that's just the can of worms, because once you open the H-1B can and you're in Congress trying to get this legislative passed with only 2 seats in Congress or 3 seats in your advantage, you need the Democrats. So if the Democrats are coming to the table to get this bill passed, then they're able to put on the table the other demands that are going to protect us and what have you. So it's all, the laws are not made by tweets or true social posts or anything. It's just getting this into the minds of people, creating chaos and confusion. The law is still the law.
That's comforting.
Until that
Yeah,
changes, until
right.
that changes, I pay very close attention to this, monitoring constantly, because I have to be able to advise my clients on what to think. But right now, it's an open book what they're actually going to do. They're fighting between themselves now. Some people remember Elon Musk. What did he say? I'm going to fight you to this. Go F yourself. So that's a serious battle there. So they're trying to put a bill on the table. Then that to me looks like an opportunity for us to be able to get more on the table that benefits families, and that. So family immigration is the backbone of the country. The business immigration, I think, is important because, when we bring people over here and we train them in our institutions, why should we send that talent someplace else? Why don't we keep that talent for our benefit? Those people graduating from MIT, Cal Poly, that's what that's supposed to be about, is to be able to, we've trained the talent, let's keep the talent. And that's really what I would imagine Vivek and Elon would get to. They're only talking about H-1Bs now, but that's still a part of the whole thing. That if we train and we've trained the talent, let's keep the talent. Don't let them go to the Chinese. Don't let them go to our competitors to be able to outsmart us and get ahead of us with our own trained people.
After we paid for it. Sure.
That
We have 2 hands up, and Miss Bay, you've been very patient. I saw you had a question in the chat, and then Mr. Harris. Miss Bay, go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, so you can delete my question in the chat. I wanted to know 2 things. First, let me just say this. When they started talking about deporting people that were immigrants, and since it was coming from a person that was just so illogical, I began to worry about all of us who have changed our names and to African or Muslim names. And, even though we can prove documentation, now, like for myself, I don't have a legal name change procedure. I use the course you are allowed to legally change your name through the Social Security Administration without, going through a lawyer and everything. And you're also allowed to change your name through the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles. And with those two pieces of identification being in my Muslim name, I was then able to do all the rest of my paperwork. I've had my name for, over about 35 years, but it may come a problem if I have to prove that I am the person that I was born as, because I didn't have the legal name change where you go through a lawyer,
Where
so
do you live? Where do you live, ma'am?
in Philadelphia.
Okay, what I would do is I would just go down to the local court and find out how to change your name. That is a state law concern, it's not federal. Okay, and so
Okay.
security will require you to have that judicial order in order to change it on your Social Security card. The
No,
DMV,
you can go through Social
I'm sorry,
Security and
I'm sorry.
request a religious name change.
Well, that's one of the exceptions, and I'm not familiar with that. But if you're concerned about the use of the name and it connecting back to your birth name, then
Uh-huh.
I would get that order from your state court.
Okay. And you can do that without a lawyer? I mean,
Yeah,
I know.
I know I'm in California. They have forms. I've advised my clients to go do that, and they've done it. Savvy people, they've done it. In San Francisco, they just have a form for a name change.
Right.
So I would contact. That's why I say contact your local court for Philadelphia and find out how to get a name change, and then it should be a very routine matter.
Uh-huh.
Show that you've been using this name all these years, and so that would be the way to go about that to have that regulated. But if you're afraid, what are you afraid of?
No. This nutball that's in office, you know, and when they were saying they would just go into people's houses and take them out, it just was a concern.
This
Uh,
is fear mongering. This is the fear mongering I'm talking about.
yeah.
Our legal systems don't work like that, but it's a
Yeah.
lot of fear mongering, and it was language that we used to gin up the base, to think
Yeah.
that that's what's going to happen. That's not going to happen.
But okay, now my original question was, when you were given the timeline and going back to the period where we were the 13 colonies and
Mhm.
before that, I am very concerned. Who gave these people jurisdiction? Who gave them authority to start saying who can come in and who can't come in? Even to the point where they started. I'm part Cherokee, so I'm very familiar with the Trail of Tears. Uh, uh, Even to the point where the Native American, the indigenous people, you orchestrate this law over them. Who gave these people authority? Where's this authority coming from?
You know what? Because it was hubris.
No.
They
Before,
decided to set up this
no,
country.
you're going back to the 18.
Right. It was a British colony. They came here and set up a colony and then started enforcing it by shooting Indians and telling them to stay out.
Lord have mercy.
That's how, this is the story of our history. And that's
So,
why I showed those earlier days, because that was just in the colony area. And Andrew Jackson, when he was president, he's kicked out all the Native Americans and
yeah.
had them go west of the Mississippi, which was not in the territory of the United States at that time.
Has any indigenous people group ever challenged that British colony?
I can't answer that, but they were certainly shooting and defending themselves at the time. I could say that. But they lost. They lost, unfortunately. But the battle continues. I know I live in a state where we're buying and giving back lands to Native Americans. But
Yeah.
I mean, you're asking, how did this history happen? When in
Yeah.
fact, we know from our school learning that people came in and just took the land. and fought for the land. It was not, with guns, right?
Wow. Wow. Okay, that was my question.
Mhm.
I pray one day somebody challenges their doing that, and like.
Thank you, Ms. Bay. Let's get to Mr. Harris. Thank you, Ms. Bay. Mr. Harris, your question, please.
Thank you so very much. This is the best presentation that I've ever heard. So thank you, thank you, thank you for bringing this forward. And the timeline is most
Kudos to
certainly,
Rochelle. Kudos
yes,
to Rochelle. Yes.
yes, outstanding, as this is very helpful. My question is, with the lies that Trump tells all the time of what he plans to do, how much authority will he have over immigration when it comes to executive orders?
Well, he can issue an executive order. The president has the authority to issue executive orders, but they can be challenged in the courts. That's what happened when I mentioned about the DAPA for the deferred action for parents. The courts struck it down and said it was unconstitutional. So he can issue an executive. Now, I don't know what happened when Abraham Lincoln issued the Order of Emancipation Proclamation, but we still live with that today. So that was a valid executive order that has continued. But they can be challenged in the courts, and the courts, ultimately the Supreme Court, has the final say on those things. Once it gets
So the best strategy that we can have is to lawyer up and get as many lawyers as willing to challenge some of these illegal, unconstitutional efforts that he may try to implement.
we
And
have to
my
wait. We have to see what they do.
and
And
my other
then
question
we can
is,
challenge what's being done under the law. Yes. That's why
and
people are arguing the ACLU, people like that are people out there on the front lines filing these lawsuits.
I'm just wondering what do you think? The census of 2020 suggested that this possibly is the last census that where the white will be the majority population. By 2030, it appears that the white population for the first time will become the minority population. Do you think all of this saber rattling has anything to do with white supremacy in the effort to keep
It
the
has
whites
everything
in
to,
power?
it has everything to do with white supremacy. That whole timeline I just gave you has everything to do with white supremacy. And it
Thank
continues
you.
till this day. That it's an effort and that's why even the abortions, they don't want people getting abortions so that the people can keep populating. You see, we as people of color and African Americans, we never had that migration opportunity in the 20s when all the millions of people came through Ellis Island. Black people didn't come through there. So it's always been in the only, why it has been a whites only citizenship policy since the beginning. And that has not changed. Maybe it's changed on paper, but the political battles are the ones that are being fought to have policies, because you see the visa system is structured so that the people that benefited from the most are people from Europe, because the population is greater because of what happened in the 20s. Okay, so
Thank you very much.
some people can't get in. So the people that come through the border are the people that are some people just want to live here. That's true. Good for them. But also some people are just fleeing the harms for example, I'll tell you right now, I'm representing women who have been in a forced marriage in some Muslim countries in Africa. They're being trafficked through this forced marriage process. They're being sold off into marriage of polygamous families. This is happening today. Mauritania, Chad, Burkina Faso. I'm representing those women that are coming in at the border saying, help me, I can't deal with this. They're going to cut off my genitals, my clitoris. They're going to force me to marry this 80-year-old man, and I'm going to be the third wife with no power in the family dynamic. Those are the people coming in at the border. Many of them, when you look at the Black migrants, whom I represent primarily, those are the stories that we're hearing. And some of them are just, can be political. The basis for asylum is persecution from where you have come. And for these women, they're fleeing female genital mutilation and forced marriage. Some people it's political circumstances. Other people it's religious circumstances. They can't get a visa at the consulate. They can't get into the embassy to get a visa. So they fly and take the journey because we don't have a path for them.
Mhm.
Kamala?
Oh, go ahead, Ms. Faison.
I know we're at the end of our time. Thank you so
I'm
much.
calling you Kamala. I'm
Awesome
sorry, Latorio.
presentation. No, you can call me Kamala.
She representing.
This question is about the B1, B2 visa. I know
Okay.
someone who is trying to come over, specifically related to my family from Ethiopia for a
Right.
week. And right now they have an interview there with, I guess, I don't know if it's the US or the Ethiopian embassy, but have you
it's the U.S. Embassy. Okay.
US embassy? Okay.
Right. We don't have we don't have our embassies in our country, only abroad. That's the purpose of the embassy.
So this person is in Ethiopia trying to come here for an event, and they have an interview. Have we seen any maybe decrease in letting people come over under those tourism visas? Like, is there usually anything to really worry about when you're trying?
I always find it very challenging for people from Africa to get a visitor's visa.
That's what I've heard.
However, from Ethiopia, it's a strong ally. And what you have to establish, you have to go to the website, ceac.gov, I think it is, and apply for the non-immigrant visa. And you really have to establish the fact that you're going to come back. So
Right.
if you're a professional and you've got you have work, you're older, you're established, those are the people that generally will be getting the visas.
Okay.
Generally, that's the way it works.
Okay.
And so, if you're denied, you could just reapply again. But if you're coming for a conference or something like that, those are the visas that, like you said that they're coming for an event, a graduation, a wedding. Those get closer attention than others. It depends upon, it depends upon the individual and their status as they're leaving. Somebody in their early 20s, they think maybe they're trying to come and immigrate, get an F1 visa. But if they're older, this is kind of just generally speaking, generally
This
speaking,
is an older person.
right. The older people have more flexibility because they have ties that clearly they're going to come back to, children, grandchildren, things like that. You want to emphasize ties to your own community and that you're not just trying to find a pathway to immigrate. That's really what the barriers are.
Okay. Thank you.
I assume you're trying to immigrate.
I'm just wondering if anybody else on this call is wondering this. Immigration is something that we talk and teach all the time. With you having and doing this kind of work that you're doing for immigration, what are your personal viewpoints on immigration moving forward? Like, what would some of your recommendations be for the nation in trying to define immigration policies moving forward? What would you recommend? I'm just curious.
We have to have a system that's fair. We have to have a system that's fair, I think. And then also there's some paths that need to be created for asylum seekers. We need, well, the criminalization of immigration to me is a problem, unless if there's people that have committed crimes in the country, certainly we want our criminal laws to apply. But immigration is not a criminal infraction, okay? It's only if people repeatedly do it, and that's usually a state law matter, by the way. And so, we have to have immigrants. Our Social Security right now, the baby boomers who are the largest, population generation. So who's going to feed into the Social Security system to support that generation? And we constantly need people to come in. When we have a bumper crop generation down the line, we get to have more people because right now we're closing elementary schools, if you've noticed. We're shutting down schools. So that means that the population is not there. I don't have all the numbers or anything like that, but we know that these kind of economic circumstances are at play in terms of trying to make sure that we can and many of those people are working without valid Social Security numbers, and they're not even getting the Social Security benefits when their time will come because they may have been working off of a family member's Social Security number or something like that. So the inequities for these people that come here and work are really, really great. For us, we pay into the Social Security system from the beginning because we had a right to a Social Security card. But these other people, they've borrowed, they've done TIN, all that. So in terms of general policy, I think that, we have what's called a visa lottery system that was created also because to offset the balance of the white migrants. And so people from all these other countries, it's called I'll think of the name of it again. But people can apply for the lottery. I have family members from Nigeria that have come in on this program that have won on that. It's called the visa lottery, and it was set up because to allow people from these countries that have been in areas, not really countries, areas of the world that had been denied because of the whites only policy. That's what it's been all along. And so we need to address those inequities, but we have this yin yang struggle in our country, about these issues of, because brown people and people of color have been denied access. The only way we got our citizenship was through an amendment to the Constitution. An amendment, think about that, people. An amendment to the Constitution, and we weren't even brought here against with our own will. But the thing that African Americans do is that we make the country better for everybody. And that is what is shown in that 14th Amendment, because it was for Black people only, and now it's for everybody. So anytime we bring in something in the Civil Rights era, during the Civil Rights Act of 1984, they threw in sex at the end just to try to derail it. That has been the best thing that happened, because when the cases, I worked in Title VII work, race discrimination work, when the cases went up to the Supreme Court, if they were race-based cases, you know what the response would be. But through sex-based cases and the law, Sandra Day O'Connor wrote those opinions that set the standards for how that would be litigated, and then we were able to use that analysis, that reasoning for race cases. So it's just, navigating this, the whole society is structured around maintaining, as we know, white privilege. And so the sex there helped, because if it had just been based on race, we wouldn't have gotten the kinds of law that we have now. There would have been just a lot of denials. People have a hard time believing that racial discrimination exists in this country. And the proof of it sometimes is it's so systemic that you can't really, there are always a lot of smoking guns.
Right. Not even allowed to say that anymore. Thank you, Ms. Faison. Let's run through these last few questions in the chats, and then I'm going to let you go. I really, really appreciate your time. I see one here. Erica England is asking, what would the steps be to take for someone who wants to come here to study before applying for citizenship? Do they apply to the school first, or do they apply for their visa first?
Well, the admission to the school is the foundation. Excuse me. People come to study in the United States on what's called an F1 visa program. It's a non-immigrant visa, and it does not have a path to citizenship. You have to find some other way to get the citizenship. My personal story, I married a man that was in graduate school with me who was from Nigeria. Well, he was here on an F1 visa. When I married him and petitioned for him, then that's how he got his green card. The F1 student visa is a non-immigrant visa. It's a non-immigrant visa. So you have to get into the country, you need a visa. You have to have a reason. So if you're not coming as a visitor, if you're coming as an F1, then you apply to the university, you get the acceptance, and then you go to the consulate or the embassy and ask for a visa to come to the United States to study at this school that has admitted you. And then you get into the country on that visa. You have to keep your full-time status as a student, 12 credits minimum, in order to maintain your status as a student. The minute you don't do that, you're out of status and you're undocumented. Because your F1 is no longer valid. So people that are undocumented can be undocumented in a lot of ways. They come, people that come from Britain and France, they can come over without a visa. It's called the visa waiver program, and they have the right to stay here for 90 days, Japan as well. And so people can come into the country and just stay. Those people are undocumented, but they're not people of African descent or from Latin America. These are people that had the right to come in and then just stayed they are also undocumented, but they're not really counted in, considered as the people. They're the people that are in the neighborhood that you just don't realize they don't have documentation.
That's what I'm thinking. When they start talking about this mass deportation, from an employment perspective, I'm like, are people prepared? Because you don't know what people's um, citizenship status is. We just don't know. I think we make a lot of assumptions. So that's scary. Talk very quickly, if you can, about the process of becoming a citizen, because I don't think people understand the test and that most Americans probably can't pass the test.
First of
And
all,
how long does it take? It's a lengthy process, correct?
well, once you get, first you have to get lawful permanent residence. There's no direct, the only way you directly get citizenship is if you're born here,
Mhm.
right? That's the way you get direct. Otherwise, you have to come through a green card somehow. There's a lot of doors. I tell people, if you're sitting in a room, there's a lot of, in the room of this United States, every door that you have to come in is the one you need to pursue. So if you have access to a green card, you have to get access to a green card. People in H-1B status cannot apply for citizenship because they're on a non-immigrant visa. The only immigrant visa that allows you to apply for citizenship is after you have had a green card for 5 years. Unless there's a few exceptions, unless you're married to a US citizen. So if you marry a US citizen, then you can apply for your citizenship in 3 years. In 3 years. So there's some variations on that. But the general rule is 5 years for citizenship to be eligible to apply. Eligible to apply, and the test really isn't that difficult. I think people could just follow. You can just they give you. There's a lot of sample test questions out there that people can study. They only ask you about one or two of them. I haven't lost a person yet that I've taken in for naturalization, and some of them could barely speak English well.
Yeah, you always see these things where, we were married, the husband's in one room, the wife's in another room, they're asking you
I've
what
had,
color is the bedroom, and all that
I've
really
had that
happens.
happen.
Yeah.
People are profiled. So, for example, I had a situation with a case where the man was much younger than the woman, for example. Those are red flag cases, for example. And we had, the basic thing is that you just have to establish that it's a valid relationship. You know, if it's, if you slept there last night and you don't know what side of the bed you slept on, maybe you weren't there, right? And there is a lot of fraud. So that's what they're fishing for. But tell the truth.
Tell the truth. All right, last two questions, Judy, real quick, and then Erica, and then I swear, Rochelle, I'm gonna let you go. Go ahead, Miss Judy. Miss Judy, what's your question, babe?
Oh, so there's a lady who spoke earlier on said she had a British citizenship. Isn't it possible for her to have a British citizenship and an American citizenship?
Yes, yes,
It is possible. Okay, good.
yes.
Thank
For the
you.
longest of time, the Americans have said that we don't recognize other citizenship, but we don't control that. If you're a British citizen, it's up to the British country to take your citizenship away. It's not that we don't have authority to do that. They may just recognize your US citizenship and not recognize the British one, but who cares? So your citizenship is determined by the country that confers it to you. And if you have more than one
May I
citizenship,
just say,
yeah,
I never became an American citizen. If she was referring to me,
No,
I
no, no,
still.
no. My question was whether you wouldn't be able to do that. I didn't say you were.
Oh, you can
yeah,
have a dual citizenship. It's
yeah, dual
called dual
citizenship.
citizenship
Right,
if I applied.
right.
And you didn't. Okay. Thank you, Miss J. Erica, what's your question, babe?
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Everything's been really informative. I wanted to follow up with my question in the chat about someone who wanted to come and study here and then wanted to pursue becoming a citizen after that. So you were saying that the F1 visa program is for students, but it's a non-immigrant visa.
Yeah.
So after they graduate, could they still apply for citizenship while they're in school with the student visa, or would they have to wait until after they graduate to do so?
There's no way to apply for citizenship without having a green card. You have to have a valid status to be able to do it. And even if you have a green card, you can't apply till after you've had it for 5 years. So what happens for people that come in as students is that they have what's called the OPT, which allows them to apply for a work permit for a year so they can get what's occupational training. And then some people decide to go into a graduate program. They could do a year, their OPT, and then the next step for people in that category is an H-1B. Really, that's the next step if they really want to stay here.
Okay.
They,
So
you
they would
can't-
do their student, they
you have
would
to
do their
get a green
student visa.
card. You have to get a green card before you can apply for citizenship. You can't just apply for citizenship.
So a person would have to
So they would have to do
graduate.
the graduate and then apply for the green card and then the OPT, or you can do the
But you have
OPT
to have
before
a
the green
basis
card.
for applying for a green card.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not just because you're here. You have to have a path. It's either family or business. So a business has to sponsor you for a green card, or a family member has to sponsor you for a green card.
So
The
while
only
the
But you would have to
students,
do that.
way to get a
But you
green
would have
card without that is if you have asylum status, and asylum status is a path to a green card. After 1 year, you have the right to apply for a green card, and then after 4 years from that, then you can apply for citizenship. So
Okay.
not anybody can just decide to apply for citizenship. You have to show that you have the right to, and you don't have that right unless you've had a green card for 5 years.
Mhm.
Okay, green card for 5 years. So you could graduate and then apply for the OPT you're mentioning, and that's like a 1 year for that occupational training. And then while you're doing that, apply for a green card.
You can't apply for a green card unless you have a green card, you have a basis. So either somebody's
Okay.
petitioning for you, like a company, or a family member.
Okay.
It's not a right to be able to be a US citizen just because you're in the country.
Okay. Great, great. Thank you.
Jocelyn, I love you, so I'm going to let you ask your question. Go ahead,
I have
Jocelyn.
another question about dual citizenship. If you're an expatriate, you're supposed to be paying your taxes. If you're in Ghana or someplace else, you're still supposed to pay your taxes.
That's a good one because a lot of people are moving outside the country, so they
Which is
need to know
good.
that.
I think
Yeah, it is good.
I lived outside the
Mhm.
country for 2 years. I lived in France. This was in the 70s. So, but I encourage people to do that. My children, I have 3 children. 2 of them right now are living outside the country. So it's a growth experience. You really learn a lot, I think, in terms of as a Black American, actually, it gives you a sense of liberty because you're not in the same profile of being a Black American here. People don't know who you are or what you are, but there's
Right.
anti-Blackness everywhere.
That's true. But talk a little bit more if you can, because I lived in Ghana for 6 months, and I know, and a lot of these longshoremen, they do, or the people who live outside the country, they do those jobs because there's a certain amount of time that if you stay outside of the country and you get a large amount of money that you can earn that's tax free. And then after that, I don't know what the numbers are. Do you?
I'm not a tax lawyer. I just advise people to talk to a tax lawyer.
Yeah, keep that in mind, folks. And I want to say it was like if you're gone for like 18 months, and you can come back, but just for like a vacation, not for if you're consistently gone, and it's some crazy amount of money that you get to make and it's tax free. So there are definitely benefits to living outside the country that we don't entertain. Jocelyn, go ahead with your question, please. Jocelyn, did I lose her?
I think that was the question she asked was the one that Rochelle answered.
She had her hand up. I don't even see her now. I think she might have signed out.
Yeah, but the question was about dual citizenship that she had in the chat also. I'm
Oh,
assuming
there's
that's the correct.
Jocelyn. She's still here. Okay, Jocelyn, I'm assuming your question got answered. Um, and then too, the last thing I wanted to ask you with the H-1B visas, somebody said the nickname Hire One Brother. Um, is my understanding of even that is that if you're here on an H-1B visa, you're here because you offer some kind of specialized skill that Americans don't have, that you're here for a specialized reason. Is that fact or fiction? Like, yeah, and that's why a lot of them are techies because apparently, they have these tech skills that, as Elon Musk says, what do you say? We're too dumb and too lazy to have acquired.
That
So
was
is that
Vivek
right?
Ramaswamy. That was Vivek Ramaswamy who said that.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So
So is that right though? You're supposed to be here because you have some specialized skill, and
the
that's
qualifications for the H-1B visa are set out. You usually have to have and there's a lot of regulation around. It's going to depend on the job description and your resume and all. But the baseline would be usually a bachelor's degree. Um, there are some exceptions for people that have extensive experience in some area, 10, 12 years or something, that may not have a diploma but can document that experience. So it's case specific in that way, in terms of the job description that they're filling and the resume that they bring to it. Right. And there are certain requirements around the H-1B that they have to fulfill when they're doing that, when they're applying for people. Most of that happens in the spring. There's a when there's a big rush, when the visas open up, everybody's filing for it in the spring. I don't do a lot of those. Very few have I done. I work primarily with people, with families, people, and small businesses. There's another program for people, for example, who are, we have treaties with people who can, call the e-visa. You mentioned that to me earlier, Helen, when you said the E3 visa for Australians. There's some countries, a lot of French-speaking countries, the Congo, Guinea, a couple of other countries have this e-visa, which allows you to come into the country and create a business, and start a business and operate the business. I tell people, look at all these French restaurants we never used to have. Those people are coming in on e-visas. You can just look at the US Embassy website in France or Mexico, look at the e-visa, and basically people that can start a business here, or I represented somebody who did start a business here and then got them into the e-visa program. Ethiopia, I think, has it as well. I advised some people from Ethiopia to come in on that visa. They opened a coffee shop here and came in on the e-visa. And that's a
That's interesting.
non-immigrant visa that's indefinitely renewable, but it's not a path to citizenship.
Okay. Very
You have to
interesting.
get another basis to get citizenship. It's like an F1 visa. How long can you be a student? But on the E visa, it's indefinitely renewable.
Okay.
And so it's like an economic stimulus for the country. And so from certain countries, it's called e-treaty countries. Mexico has it as well.
Okay. Great, great. I'm scanning the chats as we wrap it up here. I'm looking at my own questions here. Make sure that is there any while I'm looking, is there anything
Helen,
more
can
that you just
I ask the question about those who may come in to start businesses?
Mhm.
Like when Hong Kong was closing, um, people who wanted to immigrate to other countries like Canada and Australia, they charged like 100,000 or something like that to come into their countries. Does the U.S. have something similar to that, where people who
Yes,
are interested,
we do have,
what's
right.
the
We have
point?
something similar to that, but yeah, we do have something comparable to that. I don't do a lot of that, so I can't give you any numbers on that, but there is certain investments in certain zones. If you're investing in those areas, you can kind of buy a green card. That is a possibility. It's a high dollar amount. I know wealthy people from other countries have want their kids to come to go to school here rather than doing the F1 process. They bought their kids a green card, and the kid came, lived here, and did that. So there are other ways, yeah, that I didn't get into to get green cards, but it's not citizenship. It's green card first. In order to get
So,
citizenship, you have to be naturalized. That's a separate process.
so the Russian women that were coming into Florida and having
so
anchor
glad
babies,
you read my mind because that's where I was going. There's a whole go ahead,
It's a
Claudette.
business what they're doing. Yeah, that's what they've been doing. And right, and those people, right, they're having, I don't think they like to call their babies anchor babies, but right, they had to get a visa to get into the country, and somebody
Just
gave
so
them
you,
a
just so
comment.
you folks who may not know, there's a whole operation where Russian women who are in their, seventh or eighth month of pregnancy literally come to Florida and they have hotels that host them, and they stay here just long enough to have the baby. The baby's an American citizen, and then they go back to Russia. They have no intention of living here, which I find very interesting. And we could talk about that, but that opened up a whole nother hour conversation. That and it's because they're white. I mean, of course, that's why they're allowing this to happen. But that's interesting. I was shocked
And
when I'm not
also,
really shocked.
what it's an investment. It's an investment in the future. The child could come here when they turn 21 and petition for their parents. So, and I've
The
had
child
people,
also can run for president.
yeah, they could technically, perhaps, but we've got millions of Americans that have that qualification as well.
Yeah,
But
no,
like,
I'm just saying. I'm just saying. I just find it very interesting. I know when I was in Ghana, I was in a restaurant eating breakfast, and a father and son came in. They looked so cute. They were dressed alike, and their names were Kwame. So he got really excited to tell me that little Kwame was born in Reston, Virginia. And, he expected, I think, that I would get really excited about that. And I was like, oh, so he said when Kwame got to be of college age, he would be an American citizen. He could go to any school that he wanted. And I said, oh, that's good. And I said, so will Kwame bring his skill sets back here, when he becomes a doctor, lawyer, or Indian chief or whatever? Oh, no, he said. Oh, no, he will stay in America. And I said, and then I'm not impressed. Tell me that you're doing this so that Kwame can contribute to Ghana and we can have a good conversation. But I was just like, really? But yeah, so it happens all the time. And people do it for all kinds of different reasons. But yeah. Um,
I have family
okay.
members that were in that situation that were born here. The father took them back, and then all they have to do is just get their passport and come on in, just like us, just like anybody else
Yeah.
that has U.S.
Yeah.
citizenship.
Yeah, I don't have a problem. I mean, I look, do what you're gonna do, but I just, like, if you're in Ghana, and when I was in Ghana, it's 2014, and it was right after Maya Angelou had passed away, and I read her book for the first time, All God's Children Need Traveling Shoes, and I'm reading her book written 50 years before, and I'm seeing some of the same things in terms of the infrastructure, and I share that with him, and he said, yes, they had a proverb there, and it said that if my grandfather, who died 50 years ago, should wake up, he would not have a problem finding his way back home. And I said, exactly. And that's why I need little Kwame to come back to Ghana and contribute to this economy. But that's a whole nother, that's just my personal thing going on. But anyway, did you have first of all, thank you so much for your time. This has been like super duper interesting. I hope that we got to cover most of the things that were put in the chats, and people are still dropping stuff in the chat, but I'm going to let you go. But I wanted to know if you have any closing remarks that you wanted to share with us before we go.
Well, I think I just thank everyone that decided to come and hear the presentation. I just want to give people confidence to understand that there are laws in place that regulate these matters, and don't let the bluster get you all confused and worried. So, and if you have concerns, reach out to an immigration attorney.
I have no idea. Whoever that is singing, I need you to stop or mute yourself. Probably, I don't even know who it is. Can you guys see who that is? I can't.
It was James Harris. He muted himself.
Thanks,
Mr.
James.
Harris. Okay. But anyway, yeah, and that's important. I'm so glad that you shared that because people are panicking. And what I hear you saying is be calm and just wait and see what happens and don't react to that which we don't know as
We
yet.
can't do anything because nothing's been done.
Mhm.
Nothing's been done.
Helen, to that point, is there any hotline number, like a national hotline number, if something should pop off, like how flights were being turned around when Trump took office the last time, where people need help? Is there a national number or support number or anything?
Depends upon what kind of help you're really referring to.
For people who are entering into the country, or if you're being snatched up in a dragnet for being deported.
Yeah, it's just speculative at this point. It is speculative at this point. I know that the place that I work at, the Haitian Bridge Alliance, we do have a hotline for people that people can call. But that's for them to get immigration services. What I'm doing here, though, is educating people to understand to just, I think it's a lot of fear mongering, and I think it's wrong to do this. And my conclusion is that all this bluster and this rhetoric was to get votes. The actual ability to implement policies like that, we'll see what they try to do, because as I said earlier, they're already fighting internally as to what they want the policy to be. Somebody now wants H-1B. Somebody else is going to want something else. And so getting a legislation through the Congress is going to require, it's not, people can't just pull laws out of the sky. So we have to have some legal foundation for what we're doing, and right now it's not there.
Wonderful. So the last question I have, somebody has in the chats, and you and I didn't discuss this. Do you want to leave contact information or?
That's fine. I don't know if people need my services. I can leave my office line here. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. That would be great. That would be great. And I think that's it that we have for questions. If you all could come off mute and we can give Rochelle a farewell, and of course we'll hang around for a few minutes after the call so we can talk about what's up next. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for participating. There's no question in my mind that you found this helpful and informative. And we'll look forward to continuing these kinds of conversations into the 2025. This is our 5th year. I cannot believe we've been meeting online since March 2020, guys. So we'll have to do something special. Yeah, we'll have to do something special in March. And for those of you who are on the call, we're leaving next Sunday. We will not be gathering because we will be escaping the noise in Jamaica. So if you all can unmute and we can do what we do, I just want to say, when Black women gather,
amazing things.
Amazing things happen.
Amazing things happen.
Yay!
Amazing
Great,
happen.
great.
Welcome to your amazing.
Amazing things.
Ashe, Ashe,
amazing things happen. And thank you all so much
Ashe.
for another amazing Sunday. And we'll talk again, not next week, but the following week. And again, hang on for those of you who want to just chit chat for a few minutes after this. But thank you again, Rochelle. And she dropped her information in the chat. So if you need to reach out to her, you can do that. And of course, you can always reach out to me, and I will, get in touch with her if you can. But okay.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.